I'm so excited to talk to you because, yes, Nvidia's in your strategy, but so is everything else around the world. And what Jensen outlined there on China is so interesting. The base case assumption right now for Nvidia is zero access to China. Maybe we'll get some clarity. There's everything else that comes with that. And I just wonder how much attention you really pay to Nvidia's ability to service the China market or not.
I mean, it's a really good question. And I think the honest answer is it's not really factored into our upside cases for NVIDIA for a while, because the problem there is you're having to try and prejudge what politicians might want to do at some point in the future. So H200s have been approved for export to China since last year, but it's the Chinese government's decision not to approve purchases by Chinese companies that has stopped that sale going through for NVIDIA. Now, I think the really interesting long-term question for us is actually what that means for the broader supply chain in the long term, because is there a case that China could build up its own domestic chip supply chain? Now, long-term, maybe that's possible. Maybe it does threaten NVIDIA eventually, but two things give me comfort on that over at least the next 5 years. One of those is that the existing high-power chips in China are still a fraction of the performance of NVIDIA's leading chips, so I think that gives non-Chinese companies and AI researchers a leg up for the long term. And the second thing is it's actually really, really hard to build up a scaled and complex semiconductor supply chain. It's not as easy as just putting capital into it as China has done in the past with things like EVs and immersion to global dominance in the battery supply chain, for example. These are extremely complex bits of equipment that require cooperation around the world. And that's just not something that I think you can do year on year if you're only relying on the domestic demand that you get from China and you're not able to sell internationally.
We just showed SK Hynix is a part of your strategy, and what we played to you a moment ago was a conversation I had with Jensen Huang on Monday. And it seems memory is still the bottleneck, but the way that Jensen outlined it to me is 3 years ago, he went to the memory makers, including SK Hynix, and he said, this is what I think the world will look like in a few years' time. And he tried to convince them to invest in permanent capacity. You know better than I do, Paulina, memory has been boom and bust, cyclical, historically. In your strategy for SK, is that different now? Is there permanency to the capacity that's needed?
So I think bottlenecks is a really interesting framing because people tend to think, oh, a bottleneck is extremely investable and that can lead to a lot of growth and a lot of upside. And that's true to a certain extent. But I think markets are actually quite good at, in some cases, recognizing bottlenecks well ahead of time and investing in them before the fundamentals even come through. So as long-term investors, what we're trying to do is identify these structural opportunities or companies that become even better as they scale and deepen their competitive position in the ecosystem. So I'd contrast SK Hynix here on the one hand with TSMC, because to some extent it's a portfolio construction question. So I think that there is a potential that SK Hynix becomes a substantially better company over the long term. The fact that they are able to extract these long-term purchase agreements from customers now is really a substantial difference over history. The industry has consolidated. It's not as irrational as it used to be. And I think that there is a case to be made that with the rise of HBM, and in particular custom HBM, that creates a degree of lock-in with customers. That means that these are no longer commoditized products as they have been in the past. But that's just a hypothesis, and I think we're going to see how that develops over time. And I'd contrast that with something like TSMC, which is actually the largest position in our portfolio, where I think they have demonstrated that extreme control and dominance over their entire supply chain and the ability to coordinate multiple actors in an increasingly complex ecosystem. And that means that as semiconductors become ever more complicated to produce, TSMC just keeps getting better.
Sometimes you can't say what the story is from just a few market sessions, but Friday through Tuesday's close, we were almost in correction territory, particularly in the chip sector, right? And you're coming to us from sunny Scotland. I was trying to make sense of what the net outcome was of the President of the United States trip to China. And without putting words in your mouth, I think that you would say investors now start to look outside of the US, look internationally.
I would certainly hope so. There's such a rich hunting ground for AI-related names outside the US. I think there's a really interesting dichotomy that chips and AI is sort of designed in America, but it's manufactured internationally. And whether it's TSMC actually making the chips themselves, whether it's SK Hynix putting the memory inside the systems, or ASML that builds the EUV machines, the lithography machines for producing the chips at TSMC fabs. They do that in the Netherlands. Like all of these companies companies are extremely interesting, again, extremely dominant in their particular industries, and that makes them great investments for a concentrated strategy like ICG. I think the other thing that we can do, being based in sunny Scotland, is take that step back and say, yes, the market is doing its thing. There's a tendency, I think, for the market to price a lack of a catalyst as a negative thing. The fact that there wasn't really any news about chip exports coming out of the Chinese summit was seen as a bad thing. But I think over the very long term, none of that affects the fundamentals of any of these companies. They are still extremely strong growing. And in fact, the fact that TSMC raised its guidance for AI growth over the next 5 years to 56% is really encouraging, because again, they have this insight into the entire supply chain. And so the fact that they're able to do that with a great degree of confidence gives us the conviction as well.